Our scripture today is Psalm 133. Let's hear what God has for us here. Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head, running down on the beard of Aaron, running down on the collar of his robes. It is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord has commanded the blessing, life forevermore.
Who here likes the sitcom Friends? Okay, we got a sister, you got a couple people. I know that a lot of you guys watch it. I read that 52.5 million people watched the last episode. It has changed culture. 10 seasons, started back in 1994, 62 Emmys. There's something that draws us. We long for friendship. We want close friends. We want that unity. We want that companionship. It makes me think of a friend that I had back in Chattanooga. And I don't know if I've told this story to y'all or not. I know I've told it to the students. But his name was Geoff. He was brilliant, went to Duke. He works with Google now, Google X, and kind of I think they just let them design and come up with all kind of just creative stuff. They just get to be creative. And Geoff had a friend, and he must have been a close friend, because Geoff and his friend decided one spring break when he was at Duke that he wanted to go, they wanted to go to Disney World together. And that they were going to go to Disney World on the back of on a moped, one moped. So the two of them, they were going to go dumb style, one backpack, two men, 1,400 miles from Duke to Disney World. And it took them like half the week to get down there. They had one day at Disney World. They got back on their moped. They headed back to Duke, and they got to Savannah, and they blew a tire. And it was their back tire. And they went to every store in Savannah that they could get around to, trying to find a tire. Could not find one the right size, so they had to get a smaller tire. And it dropped their max speed from 40 miles an hour to 32 miles an hour. And so by the time they got back to Duke, they were 30 miles outside, and they called another one of their buddies, and they said, please get your truck, come get us. We can throw the moped in the back. That, brothers and sisters, is friendship. And that's what the Lord has brought before us this morning in Psalm 133. Eugene Peterson, if you know anything about Psalm 133, it's one of the songs of ascent, and they used to sing these and recite these together as they would go up to Jerusalem. And Eugene Peterson says about a song that or the song of ascent, that it's a long obedience in the same direction. I know you've probably heard Mark talk about that before. And friendship is a long obedience in the same direction. It's hard, and yet at the same time, I want to encourage you this morning just to lean a little bit further into your relationships, that you really need this, that it's not just about you and Jesus. So often we think it's just Jesus and me, but it's Jesus and us. And this is hard. This is hard for me personally. I am on the Myers-Briggs. I'm an introvert. I am a peacemaker by nature. And, for me, I just want everything to be to be right and well, and relationships are hard. To lean into those relationships, to push on each other, for iron sharpening iron. And I am so proud and love to see so much of that going on in our congregation, in our church. But even for me, I mean, some people would say about me, you are so open. But yet, so often I feel so awkward being an introvert and being a peacemaker in these relationships. And I have to lean in, and yet I find myself sometimes leaning in ways and being very open and vulnerable in ways, but in other ways, I'll use that openness and vulnerability over here to hide other parts of me, to hide it. And yet, in Psalm 133, we read that it is good and pleasant when brothers and sisters live together in unity. It's good and pleasant. This is good. This is right. This is how God created it. If we go back to Genesis chapter 1, you see over and over again this cadence and this rhythm, and God saw that it was good. He created vegetation, and God saw that it was good. He created light and day and night to separate, and God saw that it was good. And He created water and living creatures, and He saw that it was good. And there was livestock and cattle, and God saw that it was good. And then He says, and God saw that all that He had made, and it was very good. But in chapter 2, verse 18, the Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. It's not good. And this was before the fall. This was before sin ever entered. This is when they were in the garden. And God said, it is not good for man to be alone. And this just isn't husband and wife. This is relationally. We were not created to do this alone. It's really, as a Christian, I believe strongly it's life and death for us. We need each other. We have to have each other's back. We need that encouragement. We need people speaking into our life. I recently was reading a book about Neil Roberts, where it had a little section about Neil Roberts. Neil Roberts was a Navy SEAL over in Afghanistan, and they were going in, a team of SEALs were going in to land on a ridge, and the Chinook, the helicopter they were in, came to land on the top of a mountain, and they didn't realize that they were in the middle of a Taliban camp. And they started shooting at the helicopter, and they were kind of in little bunkers all around. And the helicopter swung out, and Neil Roberts fell out of the helicopter. And what led to another helicopter being shot down, and they sent in some people to rescue him, and another Navy SEAL team came in to rescue him. And there's a quote that Dick Couch says it's a book called The Finishing School, and listen to this. He says, there is one thing that bothers me. Navy SEALs are all about teammates and commitment to the team. We're pack animals. In his last battle, Neil Roberts fought and died alone. Somehow, more than anything else, this seems an injudicious end for a magnificent warrior. That really jumped out to me. You and I, we're I don't know that Scripture calls us pack animals, and I don't know that but we're a flock, right? And I don't really know the difference. Somebody can probably explain it to me after the sermon. I don't know the difference between flocks and packs and herds, but we were created for relationship. And we were created to have each other's back, to stand with each other, to encourage, to equip. And I think this is what we see with Jonathan and David. And there's one verse I want to look at. Here's my springboard here from Psalm 133 to 1 Samuel 18, chapter 1. And it says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. He became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. For you see, with Jonathan and David, we have a beautiful window into what God created relationships to be. And God incarnates His love and His grace, His wisdom, His protection, His goodness, His joy, His mercy, His compassion through relationships. That's how He incarnates it for you and I. And so, two quick points from this passage. They were knit together. Just a little bit of history. I don't know if you remember much about Jonathan. You couldn't make this stuff up. He was Saul's son. Saul was the king. David had been anointed king, was not yet king though, and Jonathan was in line for the kingship, and he was a mighty warrior in his own right. He in chapter 14 of 1 Samuel, several chapters before this, he says to his armor bearer, "Come, let us go to the Philistine outpost on the other side of this valley over here, and let's go. Come, let us go over to the outpost to those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." So here's Jonathan. He's saying, hey, here's a group of Philistines over here. Let's just wander over to them, you and I, and it doesn't matter if there's two of us and a bunch of them. The Lord will save us if He wants us to fight. So he tells his armor bearer, he says, let's go up and let's wait and see. And if they call us over, then obviously the Lord is going to give them to our hands. And if they say, hey, stop there, then we'll just go back to our camp. So of course, the Philistines, they say, look, the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes that they're hiding in. So the men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor bearer, come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson. So Jonathan, it says in verse 13, he climbed up on hands and knees and they killed them all. They killed all 20 of them. And then Israel saw what was going on and they jumped into the attack as well. And so it's no surprise in chapter 17 when David comes before the Philistines and he says, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin. I have come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, with whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give your carcass to the Philistine army, to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give all of you into our hands. And what did Jonathan say? Jonathan said, this is my kindred spirit. I found another man like me, another man who will trust the Lord, who will lean into Him, who believes, who walks by faith. And so they were of kindred spirit. David needed a kindred spirit, didn't he? This was the hardest time in his life. Saul, after he kills Goliath, Saul calls him into the camp and he blesses him and he says, come live with me. But the people, they started rising up and they were praising David, and Saul becomes jealous and tries to kill David numerous times. 6 times he tries to kill David. And yet Saul's own son was a kindred spirit who was there with David, who encouraged him and equipped him, who walked with him. I recently read a book that was tying depression and our lack, it was specifically talking about men, but our lack of relationships to our depression. And, I don't know how true all that is, and there's chemical, imbalances, there's all kind of stuff, but he made a great case that those that have deep, lasting, kindred spirit relationships are far less depressed. Far less depressed. Secondly, we see that Jonathan loved David as himself. Dosti, I can never say this right. This is my daughter's, one of her favorite authors, the Russian novelist, Dostoevsky. Did I get it right? Yes, there you go. I've been reading this. She took a class. She loved it. She read all these books. And so I'm trying to read with her this past year. Here's a quote. To love a person means to see him as God intended him to be. To love a person means to see him as God intended it to be. I've got I heard in the last week or two, I don't even know where I heard it. I went back to try to find it. In a book or on a podcast, and they were saying that they have the best hunting land you could buy. And he said, it is prime hunting real estate, but I've got posted signs all over it. Got posted signs every 20 feet. But I've got a couple of close friends that know me, so they don't even have to ask. They don't have to ask to hunt on my property. And they can come in and they can ask me questions. They can see things in my life. They can stand back and they can say, why did you say that? Why did you? And you see what he did with that illustration? And he was saying, man, I put up these posted signs all around. And I only let a few in. But those few that I let in that love me, I know that they want what's best for me. And I let them ask me questions. I want them asking questions. I want them hunting on my property. I want them looking for sin. Hebrews chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. See to it, brothers, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God, but encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you will be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. You see, love and speaking into each other's life go hand in hand, because we want to see the other person as God intended them to be. And brothers and sisters, we need those relationships where people are speaking into our lives, where we're not hardening our hearts to sin, where people are free and they know they're free to come in and love us well. When David didn't have that, after Jonathan had died, what happened to David's life? There was murder, there was adultery, there was death. I mean, David's life went sideways. See, he didn't have that kindred spirit. He didn't have that relationship. He didn't have that loving person that he had opened his life to and said, come, let me speak into your life, and you speak into my life. In the passage right after 1 Samuel 18, chapter 1, it says, and Jonathan, this is verse 3, and Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. And Jonathan made a covenant in chapter 20 with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan and David reaffirmed their oath out of love for each other because he loved him as himself. It says, after David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times to face the ground, and they kissed each other and they wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is the witness between me and you, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" And then in 2 Samuel chapter 1, after Jonathan's died, David says, "I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother, for you are dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women." Do you see the depth of relationship there? That lasting love. And they made a covenant together. Their love was covenantal. In today's society, we want to, we are all about consumerism, cultural consumerism. And it is cost benefit. What is this going to cost me, and what is this going to benefit me? And even in our relationships, that just naturally bleeds over. But Jonathan and David, this was a covenant, a love that is spoken of as Hesed love. We've talked about it. We've had a Sunday school class on it. Bob Smith taught. Great Sunday school class. This covenantal love where Jonathan takes off his robe and he gives him his sword and his tunic. And he says, "My goal is that, I want you to be, David, the best that you can be. I want you to be what God has called you to be. Even if it costs me what? Even if it costs me my kingship, my place on the throne, this is what God has for you. And so my entire goal is going to be to bless you. My entire goal is going to be about you, my friend." What would our friendships look like if they were covenantal instead of consumeristic? If we were looking at each other and we were going, prophet, priest, and king. I want to see that in you. I want to see, our application right here. I mean, let's jump to the application. The who, the why, and the how. The who. My question for you this morning is, who are you knit together with? Who are you loving well? Who are you committed to? Who are you helping know, enjoy, and follow Jesus? Who are you trying to say, "Lord, I want them to be a prophet, a priest, a king in your line, and my whole goal is to encourage them"? This, brothers and sisters, this is what we're about as a church. This is our vision statement. Our mission statement. We want to help one another. We want to help one another know, enjoy, and follow Jesus Christ. It is all about Jesus. And this is where you find your joy, your security, your life. It's in Jesus. This is why we talk about Jesus all the time. It's in Him. And so the principle from this morning is these relationships where we can push each other toward that, where we can help each other. Why do we do this? Here's the why. We hear it all the time in leadership books now. They say, start with the why. Start with the why. And this is why we say it every week. This is why we come back to the gospel every week. This is why we preach Jesus every week. John 15:12 and 13. This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. No greater love has no one than this, that one lays down his life for his friends. This is my commandment, that you love one another and that you lay down your life for your friends. There's no greater love than this. What did Jesus do? Jesus laid his life down for you and I so that we could be free, so that we could love one another. It's what I was saying at the beginning of the sermon. So often I hold back because, I'm trying to protect my own identity. I want to be liked. I want to be loved. I want to be a peacemaker. I don't want it to be awkward. I don't want to ask you hard questions. I don't want to push on you sometimes because I want you to love me. But man, when I lay down my life, and I put that aside because Jesus has given me that freedom, because he's laid down his life for me. And my whole goal now is to help you know Jesus more, to help you enjoy Jesus more, to help you follow Jesus more, whatever that may be. It's going to be different for all of us. The Lord's working in our lives differently through his word and through the Spirit. He's calling us different things, but to be asking each other questions and not trying to fix each other. We don't need to fix each other, but we need to love each other. We need to encourage each other. So the how. How do we do this? We already talked about Jesus gives us the freedom to do it, but how? Listen to this from 2 Corinthians Chapter 5, verse 14. For the love of Christ compels us, because we are convinced that one died for all, therefore all died. I died with Jesus. And so my following him, he loved me, he died for me. His love compels me now, compels us, gives us freedom to love one another's brothers and sisters. We can step into that. We can lean into that. And I know that is hard for some of you. It's hard for me. But man, what a friend we have in Jesus. That he would lay down his life, that he would come so that we can have life with him. He could have done it individualistically. He didn't need the church. He didn't need to use us speaking into each other's lives. But in his goodness and grace, he chose to do that. He chose to give us each other where we can embody Christ, where we can fellowship, where we can be a flock together, where we can have each other's back. And he was the example. He is the better Jonathan. He is the better David. He took off his robe. He is the prophet, priest, and king. He put his ruling aside and came here to dwell with us. The gospel is beautiful. The gospel is beautiful. And that's why it changes everything. It changes the way we live, and it changes the way we not only live, but love as well. Let me pray.